Hello, and I hope you're doing okay. I am Andy, I am an autistic advocate, and I am also the founder of Spectrum Gaming, an online community for autistic people. And today I want to share our 3-step guide to supporting autistic people. I like to get straight into it by explaining giving a basic explanation of what autism is, but I hate it when people just use the medical criteria, which is an impairment in social communication interaction and restricted repetitive patterns of behaviour, because I just don't think this makes any sense, so I'm going to try and describe it in a different way. So put it simply, we are all different. So people have different skin colours, different eye colours, different hair colours, different levels of physical ability as well. In the exact same way, brains are different too, and people have brains that can be wired in different ways. So about 80% of people have what is called a neurotypical brain, which is the main sort of neurotype of the main way a brain is wired. But about 20% of people have brains that are wired in different ways, which include autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, dyscalculia, and more. And the important thing to know here is each different neurotype or way the brain is wired has its own positives and negatives, and I'll give a few examples of that now. So first we'll start with ADHD. I say the best way to describe ADHD is it's where your brain has the engine of a Ferrari, but it just also happens to have the brakes of a bicycle at the same time. So if you have a Ferrari brain and there's something you're really focused on, you can do an amazing job on that thing. For example, will.i.am has ADHD and he says he can focus all of that into his music. But with the bicycle brakes, you can also be put in difficult situations when you can be quite impulsive and struggle with attention at times. So it has both positives and negatives. One thing that I find quite frustrating when you look at sort of minority types of brain wirings like ADHD and autism is people always look at the traits like they're a negative thing, when actually they can also be a positive spin on them. For example, the main traits of ADHD, we've got distractibility. For me, that is also curiosity, because you can spot things that other people may not and discover new things other people may not notice. Next one is impulsivity. But if you think about it, creativity is impulsivity when it's gone right. Every time there's been a new invention or discovery, that is someone being impulsive. So in the right setting or environment, impulsivity can also be a great skill. And finally, hyperactivity. When I first saw this analogy, it came from someone called Dr. Ned Hallowell, who is an adult with ADHD, and he said hyperactivity is brilliant because while most people his age can be quite tired and lack energy quite a lot of time, he is full of energy, so that is amazing for him. And it works in the exact same way with autism. So I like to describe autism as having a bit of a hedgehog effect because it has spikes. I'd say you have strengths in areas that a lot of people don't necessarily have, but also weaknesses in some areas that most people may not have as well. For example, you may have difficulties with socialising, or you may struggle with sensory overload and have meltdowns, which are very difficult things that a lot of people don't experience. And to be fair, sensory overload is really, really challenging, and unless you've I don't think you can understand how difficult it is unless you've experienced it for yourself. But again, that also has its flip side, and because autistic people can experience the world in a much different way to most other people, you can also see the world as much more beautiful, and you can get a lot of joy in sensory experiences and other people may not be able to feel that level of emotion that you can. Autism also has other positives as well, like having attention to detail and being able to have a deep focus. Some artists have amazing memory. I actually use other thing is, like I said, the pure joy from not just from sense differences but also from your special interest, when you can have that intense focus on something that a lot of people don't actually have the opportunity to experience. So yeah, it's again, I want you to focus on the positives because we talk about the negatives all the time, but of course there are lots of negatives of autism just as there are positives. And then, as I said, you've got a neurotypical brain, which about 80% of people have. This has a few positives. For example, a lot of neurotypical people can be quite instinctive. We can find songs a lot easier people, and you might find it easier to read between the lines and understand hidden meanings behind what people say, whereas autistic people don't manage to do that as easily. One of the downsides is often the social rules do not make any sense whatsoever. How many times does someone ask you, if you're walking down the street, someone will say, "Hi, how are you?" But they don't actually want to know how you are. And to me, it makes no logical sense that people do this. So I think being a little bit illogical could be a downside of being neurotypical. And I've got a quote from Chris Bonello from Autism.org to back me up. I'll just read it out. It says, "I'm autistic, which means everyone around me has a disorder that makes them say things they don't mean, not care about structure, fail to hyper-focus on singular important topics, have unreliable memories, drop weird hints, and creepily stare into my eyeballs. So why do people say you're the weird one? Because there's more of them than me." And yeah, I just love that quote because I do think it's quite true. Yeah, as I said, each brain type has positives and negatives, and the key to thriving and for happiness for every single human being on the planet, regardless of whether you're autistic or not, is to focus on the positives and then either work on or make accommodations on the negatives. We'll come on to this later. That is one of the steps to supporting autistic people. But first, we need to go to step number 1. Step number 1 is called reparations. And the reason it's called this is I feel like this is the most important step that is not talked about enough. A lot of people talk about how to meet an autistic person's needs, how to understand what autism means. But what is important to remember from the start is being autistic in a world that isn't made for you is incredibly difficult. And before anything else, the first thing you need to do is repair the damage that is caused by the environment and the people around you who may not understand autism, which it can often leave a lot of autistic people in incredibly difficult situations. As an example, I'll explain a bit about me and my story with autism. So I wasn't diagnosed as a child, I was diagnosed as an adult, but I've also described my childhood in pictures. This picture is me in primary school when I had absolutely non-existent social skills, and I spent most of my time pretending to be a dog barking at people. It was quite funny because we used to have a corner of a playground that people saw as the cool kids corner, and I used to go over and bark at everyone to scare them off so I could be the cool kid every now and again. I also run a spider club at school where we'd look in all the little dark corners and looking for spiders, webs and spiders. But unfortunately I was the only member of that and failed to get anyone else to join me. That was me in primary school. This picture is me in high school. I was quite lucky because my mum was friends with a mum of a boy who was also going to the same high school as me, so he was forced to walk to school with me and let me sort of be part of his friendship group. But the problem then was I didn't really talk to people that much. I spent most of my time sort of watching how they interacted and analysing them so I could learn how to sort of be like them and learn to fit in and be like everyone else. So high school was very interesting because I was also very academic. I got quite good grades. I actually got the best GCSEs in my school by the end. But that was the only good thing, because I also felt very miserable because I was desperate to fit in, and no matter how hard I tried, I was still bullied for being different. I used to pretend to be really, really confident to hide all of the anxiety that I felt when I was in school. I used to always pretend I was okay and try my best to not show signs of weakness. And all of this was incredibly lonely, because like I said, I wasn't diagnosed at the time, so every day I felt confused and lost, and but didn't have a reason why I felt that way. And I say this quote a lot of the time. I said it's quite alienating because it's difficult when it feels like no one understands you, but it's even worse when you don't even understand yourself. In school, I would say I was one of those people who've described as a masker. So I would spend all day analysing people and try my best to fit in and be like everyone else. And this took so much energy to sort of process the day and try and behave like other people that it had. By the time I'd finished school for the day, I had absolutely no brain energy left. So I would lock myself in my room and delve into the world of games, sort of as a form of escapism. And I did this every single day on repeat. But I think the online world was brilliant for me at that time, and I've got reasons why here. So the quotes here are from a film called Ready Player One, where you can wear virtual reality goggles and escape into a world called the Oasis, where You can literally do absolutely whatever you want. And in the film, Parsival says, "This is the oasis. We exist as nothing but raw personality in here." Artemis says, "I beg to differ. Everything about our online personas is filtered through our avatars, which allows us to control how we look and sound to others. The oasis lets you be whoever you want to be. That's why everyone is addicted to it." And I think for me, both of these things were true. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time on... I'm pointing, but I don't know what I'm pointing at. On an app called Power Ringo, which you can see on the screen. This was just an online app where you just talk in chat rooms to random people on the internet. And there was one group where I would go to on there where I could chat to people. And whereas in real life, people wouldn't even acknowledge me if they weren't teasing me or calling me names, I had this one space where I could talk to people and say hello, and people would ask how my day was, and it was just amazing to have that one space. And the second part is also true, because I also played a game called Kingdoms at War, and out of about 500,000 players, I was the 8th best in the world for quite a long time. So whereas I felt quite useless and small in real life, I had one place where I was respected, and it was just amazing to have that as an escape, especially when I'd got home from school and had no battery left. So that was the sort of my routine through school and college. It was going there, surviving, recovering and repeating every single day. And then when I was 18, I started a part-time job working with autistic children, and it was really strange because I just connected and clicked with a lot of young people there, and it was at that moment I knew that I was autistic, but I didn't go for a diagnosis at the time. That was during the summer holidays before going to university when I went to study computer science. But while I was there studying, I felt really guilty after meeting these young people and seeing people struggling so much, and really wanted to do my best to help. So I started to work and volunteer at about 19 different organisations supporting autistic young people. I realised computer science was the wrong degree for me, so I switched to psychology. And that suited me a bit more. But the problem is, while I was there, I was still doing this same thing of trying to fit in, and it was taking so much energy. And the amount of energy that I was using became bigger and bigger, so it got to the point that I was using more energy every single day that I could recover when I got home and when I went to sleep. So my energy level got lower and lower day by day until I hit the point where I just couldn't do anything anymore. So my first year of my psychology degree, I did quite well in all of my exams. In my second year, I didn't go to 2 exams and I failed the other 2. I just got to the point where I'd had enough of everything, and the difficulty was I just felt hopeless with everything, because no matter how hard I tried to fit in and be normal so that I could finally be happy, it just never worked. And it got to a point where I also felt quite suicidal as well, and actually attempted suicide while I was at university, and luckily survived it. And when I did, the next morning, I just, as a last resort, I went on a big rant on Twitter about how I was feeling. I said, I'm 99% sure I'm autistic and I'm not diagnosed. I explained some of the difficulties I was facing, and as I did this, dozens and dozens of autistic people messaged me, and they said, the problem is you are trying so hard to sort of fit in and be normal and be like everyone else, and you need to learn to accept yourself as an autistic person. As people said this, they also said, being autistic means you have to live a different life to most people, but that doesn't mean that life has to be an unhappy one. And this was sort of a light bulb moment that just completely changed my whole life. And since then, that was about 3 years ago. 3 years ago. And since I got to that point, I've started to sort of accept my differences, stop trying to fit in as much, and I've lost a lot of friends on my journey as I've come out as autistic and started to be myself more. But things have also got so much better for me, and now I'm finally at the point where I feel like things are going well and I'm feeling quite happy with my life. And now I just want to do as much as I can to help make sure as many young people as possible avoid the struggles I faced and previous generations of autistic people have faced as well, which is why I'm here today. And this brings me on to the first point about reparations, and this problem is the autism diagnostic process, because even for me, as an example, I was diagnosed a year after that time when I attempted suicide, and it was because it was that situation that eventually led to my diagnosis. And I think this is problematic because, not just for me, but for most autistic people I've spoken to, you are not assessed for autism until you are struggling or at crisis point. And when this happens, it is so easy to associate all the negativity in your life with autism. So when you're diagnosed, rather than seeing it as a positive thing because you finally understand a bit more of your identity, a lot of people link autism with hate and embarrassment and shame when you should never be left to feel that way. But then it's also a double-edged sword, because if you aren't diagnosed, you know you're different but don't have a reason why. So that also makes it feel incredibly difficult for you. And at this moment, I think it is incredibly rare for any person to have a positive start to the autism journey, because the other thing to remember is when you're going through these difficult experiences and then you get assessed for autism, it isn't just autism that you end up with. You're autistic all along, but then you also have symptoms of depression, anxiety, trauma, and much more after struggling for so long before you got your diagnosis. And there's also quite a few other things to mention that make life much more difficult for autistic people. For example, bullying. About 90% of autistic young people report being bullying in school, and it's quite frustrating because as an adult, if I don't get on with someone or struggle with a group, I can dissociate or remove myself from a situation and not worry about it anymore. If you are a child, it is much more difficult because people tell you you have to go to school and you have to continue facing your struggles. And I think so many young people are so strong and brave to be picked on for being who they are and still continue to go into somewhere like an education setting where they're made to feel like that every single day. And then there's also people who don't understand you or your needs very well. A lot of autistic people struggle with friendships. I think people underestimate how powerful friendships can be. I've met many young people through Spectrum Gaming who've made their first friends for the first time, and they are just so thankful that finally, when they're struggling, they have someone they can rant to and speak to let off their steam, whereas before that they just had themselves. And you can get into a really negative mindset when you think about all the negative situations, and you can start to blame yourself and get into a horrendous negative cycle that you should never get into. And of course, the effects of an education system that isn't made for you. I'll come on to that a bit later as well. Unfortunately, the story is very negative for lots and lots of autistic people. So autistic people are 10 times more likely to die by suicide, and the suicide rate in autistic children is 20 to 28 times higher than neurotypical children, which I think is incredibly worrying. Just as an extra thing to prove how important reparations are, I did a survey of 50 autistic children about what life is like for them, and made a rap video with their responses, and here is the video. Angry, anxious, sad and exhausted. This list of how I feel is not exhaustive. I'm not alone in this, but I feel so alone. How am I going to last until I am fully grown? I cry every single day, and I'm begging you, please help the pain go away. If I could change one thing about my life, I would be dead. There are so many challenges that I am facing. School, I hate it. School, let's face it, I deal with bullies on an everyday basis. School is the reason I have depression. It has failed me all my life. School makes me feel inadequate and dead inside. Please stop the bullying. Stop punishing me. Stop putting me down. I'm trying my best, can't you see? School makes me not want to be here anymore. I'm told I have to go, but what the heck for? I'd rather be dead than go to school. Enough of these questions, want me get out of my room. I want to change my life. I want a friend. I feel like a burden. When will this ever end? I want to feel like I've done something right. I want to be able to sleep at night. I feel like nobody understands me. Life is so lonely, that's our reality. Please help me to make some friends. I want to be invited to play on the weekend. So many of us feel this way. We hope to be able to meet someday. I want a space where we feel safe and at home. A chance to be united and not struggling on our own. A place where people understand and are like me. Where I can be bold and free and out of the lonely world that I'm living in now. I want more sports and games and music anyhow. I want to feel happy and strong and feel like I'm doing something right for once. Right now I hate the conditions that I have, but I would like to be proud of who I am. I'll stop it there. I think one of the most frustrating things about this is I know most of the young people who got involved with this project, and quite a few are in much better situations now, fortunately. But the thing which I hate is when the video was posted and seeing countless families and young people saying that they completely relate to the video with young people saying they want to kill themselves and see no value in life anymore. And it's frustrating because it isn't because of autism, it's because of the way they've been misunderstood and mistreated. And I think if even one person feels like that, it's too much, which is why I want you to share what can be done to reverse this damage so it gets to a point where autistic young people have a level playing field and get to the same starting point as everyone else. We've got a few things to share now on that. The first thing is we need to start talking more about autism. Again, I've got a brilliant quote from Chris from Autistic Not Weird. So for people who don't know, this is a Harry Potter quote. In the books and the film of Harry Potter, there is a bad guy called Voldemort, and everyone's scared of using his real names. They call him you-know-who. And the quote says, "Sir," said Harry, "I've been thinking, sir, even if a stone's gone, I mean you-know-who." Then Dumbledore says, "Call him Voldemort, Harry. Always use a proper name for things. Fear of a name increases fear of a thing itself." And the exact same thing applies to autism. As I said, I've worked and volunteered in several groups and organisations, and the only time I hear autism used with young people present is when I'm the one who's using it myself. And it's so frustrating because when people don't talk about it, it becomes this sort of hush word, and autism starts to become something that people are quite afraid of, or I just hate how no one talks about it. It's difficult to do, but it needs to be done, because otherwise people will learn to disassociate from it or see it negatively. I've got an example here with a picture that a young person drew. So he had a picture of him on the left. He had this squiggly bit in the middle, which was blocking him from what he wanted, which was happiness, making friends and getting on well with his family. And all he knew was he had an autism diagnosis, so he saw autism as the block from stopping him from being happy. And I did some mentoring sessions with this young person, and I spoke to him about what outcomes he would want for the sessions, and there was two things. One was he wants to stop feeling angry all the time, and the other one was he would like to be able to tolerate noisy environments more. because no one had explained what autism was, he had learned that anger is a part of autism and he's always going to be angry. But anger is not a part of autism. It's a result of being misunderstood and mistreated and not having your needs met properly. And being angry is not a permanent thing, and it can change. And yeah, and with struggling in noisy environments, unfortunately you can't reduce sensory sensitivities that you find difficult, but you can accommodate for them. For example, with wearing ear defenders, or just sitting in a quieter room, because I think noisy environments are quite underrated anyway. But even without giving him any tips or advice, he felt much better about himself and felt much happier with me just explaining that, because it helped to understand himself a little bit better. Whenever I talk about explaining the importance of explaining autism, I always hear people say, but we shouldn't be labelling children. I can tell you firsthand that everyone gets labelled anyway. Before I received my autism diagnosis, I was called naughty, crazy, loser, weird, retarded, a freak. And the important thing here is autism is only a negative word if you make it one. It's for me, whereas I always felt lonely and different to everyone else, when I received my autism diagnosis, it made me realise there are millions of people who think and feel the same way I do, and it is really, really empowering to know that. And I've got another quote from a young person here, which says, "Mummy, I'm proud to be autistic." He has been in some incredibly difficult situations. A parent started a hate campaign about him being in the school because he's autistic. There's someone on his street that said he should be locked up and not allowed to go outside because he's too loud when he plays on the street. Normally, people learn to sort of hate their autism when this sort of thing happens, but the difference here is his mum's autistic as well, so she's made sure she's explained from the start what autism is, and even when he has a really difficult day, he now knows when people are mean to him or picking on him or treating him like this. He knows it isn't him that's the problem, it's them and their lack of understanding and them being judgmental. And I wish more young people had this opportunity, because it would help so much with so many of the difficult emotions that autistic young people face at the moment. One of the important things to know here is talking about autism shouldn't be a one-off thing. It's if he was just explained what autism is in one go, it would be completely overwhelming and it'd be really difficult, and I don't think it's that helpful whatsoever. I see it as a continuous open discussion. The first thing you have to do is have that uncomfortable moment where you break the ice and start talking about autism, and then it could just be the young person asks a question every few days, or you share a random fact about a celebrity, or it's that sort of long-term process and open discussions that leads to acceptance. It can't be a one-off, and you definitely can't just not talk about autism, because it never works out. I know from speaking to autistic adults, but autistic young people as well. And the other thing which is really, really useful for promoting autism acceptance is spending time with other autistic people. But this isn't just about being in a room with other autistic people for the sake of it. You need to get to a point where, like I said, where you open the dialogue and enable people to see the value in being amongst other autistic people. And once you've broken that barrier, it can be really, really powerful. It's also important to not just talk to autistic people about autism, but also their peers. Again, it's about levelling the playing field and making sure everyone's understood. For example, if an autistic person has a meltdown, normally what would happen is they might have a fallout with someone and they are excluded from joining in a group or doing an activity in the future. If it's explained that they are autistic and sometimes they're easily overwhelmed and find things really difficult, young people are much, much less judgmental than adults, so a lot of people will be understanding and supportive and can help them with that. In Spectrum Gaming, once we had a Roblox competition and someone got really upset about losing and he started shouting and left our group and said he isn't going to join back. In a normal group, he's reported being excluded after a situation like this has happened and being kicked out of friendship circles and things like that. The response in Spectrum Gaming was one young person said, "Oh, it just feels a bit overwhelmed at the moment. I'll speak to him when he's calmed down and see how he feels then." And just having that understanding is, I think, absolutely essential. So just as you need an open dialogue with a young person, we also need to have open dialogues with their peers about difference too. And there are some great ways to do that. For example, have a look at Neurodiversity Celebration Week. There are lots of free resources. The first few slides where they explain what autism is, most of that material is from the Neurodiversity Celebration Week resources, which are free to use. So I'd recommend giving a look at that. The third part of reparations is making sure you have a goal or something to work towards. Because when you are struggling, having something that motivates you is absolutely essential. One of the things which I really hate is when people say they want to focus on resilience skills and building resilience so people can, survive through their struggles or whatever it is. For me, a lot of autistic people I know are the most resilient people I have ever met, with how many difficulties and struggles they go through day by day. What's really important is having a reason to continue to be that resilient, because otherwise, what's the point in facing all of the difficulties? And thinking back to when I was at school, I had such a horrible time with bullies and feeling out of place and being picked on, that my original goal was to do the best I possibly could in school, to escape from all of those horrible people and never associate with them ever again. But then after school, when I was picked on and bullied less, I had less of a sort of reason to do that much. And I think that's what sort of helped me go down to the pit of when I struggled and dropped out of university. It was only when I was at crisis point and I got that support that I found a new purpose that enabled me to move forward, which was making sure other autistic people don't have the same fate that I had and don't have the opportunity to feel how I felt back then. And having that purpose is what has enabled me to get out of bed and get to a point where I am here now, giving this talk. It's the other thing to know is having that purpose or something that you believe is really, really powerful. I've got an example here where in the 1800s a metal rod was invented, and they said it's a brilliant invention that can cure pain and this sort of stuff. And all this rod would do, people were trained to scan it on people's bodies, and it was weird because those people in wheelchairs who would walk for the first time, and people would report pain relief when we had chronic conditions and things like that. And the interesting thing here is it was just a piece of metal. It didn't actually do anything. It didn't have any, medical benefits, but people believed that it worked, and it was that believing is so powerful that it caused these things to happen. I think it's amazing how much your perspective can change and how much more you can do if you have something to believe in and something to keep going. I recommend researching that and reading more about it because it is absolutely fascinating. Another thing to remember here when you are thinking about these feelings of sort of happiness and moving forward, happiness is not an outcome. There is not an end point where you get to a point where you are finally happy. Happiness is a process. It's the best way, the way that I see happiness is when you have your goal or the thing you want to work towards. Happiness is the journey, and when you are making progress towards your goals, that is the happiness. You never have a set point where you get to a point in your life and you're happy for the rest of your life. It's a constant journey, and without that purpose or goal, then you how can you be happy? So yeah, it's important to make sure every autistic person has something like that in their life as well. So my final point on repairing the damage, it's really important to remember that autistic people want the same as everyone else. We just happen to have more barriers to achieving that. And what we've got here is the 5 ways to wellbeing from the NHS, which I really, really love. It says for wellbeing you need to be able to connect with others, be active, take notice, keep learning, but also give back as well. I think these things help everyone. And if a young person says that isn't true, I think it's really important to not just take what they say at face value, but look at the reasons behind why they might be saying that. For example, I've met quite a few young people who say they don't want to have friends and they're better off alone and that sort of thing. I don't believe for 1 second that a single person means that, but there could be quite a few reasons why they might be feeling that way. One example is, One example is people could be picked on and bullied so much that they have started to lose value in friendships and feel like they're never going to develop one. So what's the point in trying in the first place? Another perspective is if someone is a masker, for example, it can take so much energy to socialise that you don't think socialising is worth the 12-hour social hangover you have after the event. So that could be another reason why they might be saying that. So yeah, if people say these things aren't true, it's important to look at the reasons behind it. So that was step one, reparations. Now, once you've got to that point where you feel like that sort of stuff has been done and you get to the point where you're at a level playing field, the next step is starting to understand autism, both its positives and its negatives. Rather than explaining in depth what autism is, the positives and negatives, there are quite a few key issues or challenges that I see come up quite frequently. So I just wanted to focus on a few of those things and what can help with those. The first one is masking. I've talked about this already. I sort of describe it like the Coca-Cola effect. So imagine you have a closed Coca-Cola bottle, and every time something upsets you, for example, bright lights or someone picking on you or calling you a name, imagine shaking the bottle more and more and more so that you have this bottle of cola ready to explode. And then when you go home and you're in a comfortable setting, the lid can come off because you're comfortable, and then it explodes everywhere. So this can explain why young people have explosive outbursts or meltdowns at home, but they're not seen in school because they're holding it in until they get to a point where they are comfortable. And what usually happens is parents are blamed, and people say it's bad parenting, when in actual fact it's the school not meeting that young person's needs properly, which makes them get into that state. So yeah, even if a young person says everything's fine in school and they're not able to explain what the problem is, or even if they don't particularly understand themselves, masking is usually a result of unmet needs in the school setting. So it's really important to look at autism as a whole, to put on your autism lens and your sensory lens and see what could be causing stress in that young person's day-to-day school life. Another thing to remember is even if all needs are met, it can take so much more energy for an autistic person to survive through the day. So even if you have the best days, you may still have the Coca-Cola effect when you get home because you can be overwhelmed and because it can take so much energy just to get by day. So there's also a few things that parents can do when you get home. For example, when I come home sometimes I'll close my door and barricade my door shut. Means I have no brain energy left for the day, please don't talk to me. Or we have a sort of message where if I have my headphones in, that means I'm not available to talk at the moment, but when they're off, you're welcome to come and chat to me. And that still applies to me now as an adult. Even if I have a great day at work, sometimes I can come home and I just need a few hours on my own, away from everything else, just to decompress. And if that doesn't happen, I might get a bit angry and shout it, and it still happens to me now as an adult. So yeah. The next thing is I wanted to explain a bit about meltdowns, because it is incredibly important to try and understand the reasons behind meltdowns and why they happen. If you just focus on trying to change your behaviour or punishing meltdowns, nothing will actually change. The reason why is a meltdown is when you go into fight or flight mode. This is the same instinct that happens if you're in a life-threatening situation. For example, if a lion's in after you, or another scary situation like that. When this happens, the logical part of your brain is no longer in action and you're just using your primal instinctive part of the brain. So you really struggle to think logically and be rational with what you're doing, and you're not really in control of what's happening in that moment. So yeah, it's important to not just look at behaviour and look at the reasons behind the behaviour. I'll give you an example of this meltdown type scenario. So for me personally, I am a really, really, really rubbish sore loser on games. So when I used to play Fortnite, I have broken controllers and broken doors and even more. And the problem, I've been told off for shouting too much and breaking things, but it still happened over and over again. And the reason why is I struggled with emotional regulation, and I didn't know to stop and keep on playing until it gets to a point of no return. So the way I fixed that was I made an emotion scale in my head. So I have a number between 0 and 10 when I play Fortnite of how angry I am. If I get to number 6, I'm annoyed, but I still want to carry on playing. But I force myself to stop because I know if I'm at a 6, it's quite risky. Because if I have another bad game, I could go straight back into meltdown mode. So I've made a system that works to help stop meltdowns more in that situation because I've worked out the reasons behind why they happen. I think this is the most important slide in the whole presentation, and once you start putting this concept into place, it will have a fundamental impact on the life of any autistic young person. And it's believing in the concept that kids do well if they can. And if someone is struggling or having difficulty or displaying challenging behaviour, it isn't because they want to do it, it's because of two things. Either they have a lagging skill, which is part of their neurodiversity. For example, me struggling with emotional regulation. Or the other thing is they might have an unsolved problem. So there may be a pattern of behaviour that happens over and over again. And that pattern of behaviour is related to autism or their differences or unmet needs, and it's working out what those unmet needs are to be able to put support in place for it. It's not them choosing to act out or choosing to display negative behaviour. There's always a good reason behind it, and if you get into this mindset and act like detectives, you can work with a young person and talk to them about their needs and try and work out together what the issue is and come up with a solution together. Getting into a system of doing that is the most powerful and effective thing you can ever do to support a young person, rather than just punishing behaviour and then expecting that to change things, because it really won't. And I know hundreds of autistic people who can testify to that. So the next point, again, this comes with understanding and learning more about autism, but it is really, really important to understand what is autism and what isn't. As I said previously, when you get an autism diagnosis, it often isn't just autism, but you may also have anxiety and depression and trauma and more, which can make this incredibly complex. But you need to be able to distinguish between the two, and I'll give an example. So for me, I am autistic, which means there are some things about me which will not change. For example, I am sensitive to lights, so I struggle in bright settings, and usually I wear my hood up or I just sit in the dark. I've got my lights on for this presentation, but I normally don't have them on. I'm undersensitive to balance, which is why I am sat on a gym ball instead of a normal chair, so I can sit still for long enough to be able to be here at the moment. So the things which are part of your neurotype and your brain wiring which can't change, the only way to support them is to have accommodations for those, and having support in place to meet those needs. And then the other thing to work out is the things which you can change, so the things which aren't part of autism. Well, I say aren't part of autism, I mean things that aren't part of autism are things which can be worked on as part of autism, if that makes sense. So like I said about having lagging skills and struggling with emotional regulation and stuff like that. Anyway, I haven't explained that properly. Ignore what I just said. So yeah, like I said, distinguishing between what is autism and what isn't. So for example, when I diagnosed as autistic, I was also diagnosed with severe anxiety and severe depression as well. And anything that is a sort of mental condition like anxiety, depression, any phobias, including selective mutism, trauma, those sort of things are not permanent and they can change, and the symptoms of those things can improve. So those are the things which you need to know in your head can change. But the important thing is they can change when you feel ready to do it. Because, as I said before, you need to have your goal or your purpose, and that is your main focus. But if those symptoms of anxiety, depression, or anything else are getting in your way, you also need to know you're able to challenge those when you need to in order to meet your aspirations. One example of this is I used to have a phobia of phone calls, so I would never ever answer the phone. but I really, really wanted a job as an advocate for young people at a local authority. And not being able to answer phone calls was a barrier to this. So whereas I didn't answer phone calls for years, like I said, it's important to learn about these sort of things. So phobias are irrational anxieties. So logically, you know nothing bad is going to happen, but your anxiety tells you it's scary and you need to be afraid. And the way you overcome a phobia is by proving to your anxiety a little bit at a time there isn't anything to be scared of. So I set up a step-by-step approach to overcome my phobia of phone calls, and it was having this purpose and goal of wanting this job to advocate for young people, which has motivated me to be able to take the steps to overcome it. So a lot of these things, negative feelings you have, are mental conditions. You might need a reason to be able to start to challenge it, but it's really useful to know you can challenge it when you feel ready to do that. Balance. Oh yeah, I'll move on from that. If I haven't made sense, my email is down below, so feel free to email me and I'm happy to explain in a better way that makes more sense than that. So yeah. Next point is about special interests. I just wanted to make sure everyone is clear on how they work. The important thing with special interest is when you have one, it is stuck in your brain all the time, 24/7. And even if, no matter what you're working on, it is always there in the background. You have no choice over this, and you are stuck with it whether you like it or not. For example, a lot of people have long-term interests, but mine sort of come and go, so I have lots of short-term interests. And once I had a really random special interest in Peter Pan. I watched an audition on a talent show, Britain's Got Talent or America's Got Talent, I don't remember which, and it was someone dancing to Lost Boy by Ruth B, a Peter Pan song, and since then it just stuck. So I listened to that song on repeat for 3 months. I watched every single Peter Pan book. I ordered all the original books, including the first one that was ever written, Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. And it was on my brain all day, every day. It was the only thing I could think about. But then after about 3 months, the special interest vanished. I woke up, I didn't care about it ever again. And I'm actually quite fortunate because I don't actually like Peter Pan. And it finally went until it moved on to something else, which was dinosaurs. But in that moment, it just takes up so much of your brain that even if you hate it, you can't get rid of it. So trying to dissuade people from their special interests is completely ineffective. The best thing to do when people have those interests is to support them with them or incorporate it into things that you are doing. So yeah, that's just, it's, you think about it so intensely, and I think I've explained it enough. I think you get the gist. Yeah, you can have short-term special interests. Mine switch between different things really randomly, but people can also have really, really long-term special interests that last for years and years, or even a whole lifetime. The next thing to know, that picture doesn't fit on screen, but I can explain it anyway, is autistic people really, really, really struggle with uncertainty. One frequent thing which I hear or young people say, or people say they struggle with, is if an autistic young person goes to an activity or goes to school or something like that and their expectations aren't met, they have meltdowns and have really, really challenging behaviour. And the reason for this is autistic people are incredibly anxious around uncertainty as a whole. So what happens is, you just, because your brain thinks logically, you need to have all the information so you know exactly what's going to happen and remove as much uncertainty as possible. If you don't have all the information, it's like having a piece left in a jigsaw. You just need that one piece to complete the puzzle in order for it to be achieved. And if you don't have the full information, either two things happen. One is you imagine the worst case scenario with the missing information. That gets inserted into your head and you feel really, really anxious or worried or overthink about it. And it's very common to think of a worst case scenario. The other thing is, because you need certainty, you come up with a scenario in your head of how that event must happen and what must happen in that situation, and you really, really struggle to deviate from that. So when things don't work out how you expected, then you're instantly in fight or flight mode, so really struggle with that situation. And you also need time to adjust in real time as well. So this picture is supposed to explain, I think you can still read it, explain the importance of having time to move from one activity to another, so you can sort of move your brain energy over to the new activity. So the way you help with this sort of one-track mind thing is to give as much information as possible before an event. It can take a lot of time to do this, only if a young person wants it, of course. It can take a lot of time to do this and give this information, but it's completely worth it afterwards, because it can save so much time with meltdowns and challenging behaviour, and it can also reduce the amount of negative emotion that the young person experiences, which I think is incredibly important. I've just written here, we are going on a holiday to Spain. The reason I've written this is, if I said to you, we're going to Spain tomorrow, for example, I think you automatically make some assumptions. So you might think, oh, we're going to get the plane to Spain, we're probably going to stay for a few days, and that sort of thing. And you don't have the exact picture, but you see it as a sort of pleasant thought, and you have this vague concept of what's going to happen. Now imagine that sort of thing where you imagine if you're going on that holiday, you're ready for your plane. I mean, it turns out actually I haven't booked a plane, and I was planning for us to swim to Spain, and it's completely not what you was expecting, and I'm sure it will ruin your holiday. You might not even go to Spain anymore, and you might feel incredibly upset about it. That's the sort of emotion that autistic people feel when you have this plan or expectations, and those expectations aren't met. That's exactly how they would feel. And in that situation, even though it might be a really little thing to you, for example, you know, when someone says, oh, it's only a figure placed in the wrong place, or we're only starting an activity 5 minutes later, it can feel really catastrophic for that individual. Yeah. So the final point in understanding autism is understanding the importance of self-regulation. It's really important to have calming strategies throughout the day to make sure you feel regulated and not too anxious to be able to concentrate and learn, but also not having such low arousal level that you are sort of being drowsy or unable to focus and pay attention. I say self-regulation is as annoying but as necessary as brushing your teeth, because you hate doing it. I hate taking the time to go on a walk before every meeting, and wearing my weighted backpack when I walk around, and all of this stuff which I do to make sure I can get through the day. But if you don't do it, it has a really negative impact and makes your day a lot more difficult. So even though it takes a lot of time and that sort of thing, it is really, really important. And the easiest quick fix strategies are things which include deep pressure or heavy muscle work, because they can calm you if your arousal level's too high, but also alert you if your arousal level's too low. For example, let's say you've just woke up and I ask you to do 10 press-ups. That's going to wake you up a little bit. I'm sure you'll understand how that would happen. But also, if you're feeling really anxious or worried or overexcited, having 10 press-ups gives you the time to calm down as well. So it does work both ways when you have heavy muscle work or deep pressure too. So that's the understanding autism aspect. Step 3. We've only got a few slides on this. Step 3 is about growth, improvement and maintenance. The important thing to know is when you are learning about autism and working with a young person to help them through their difficulties, there is no ending point where everything suddenly becomes simple and easy. Supporting an autistic person is a continuous process of learning and improving. As a 23-year-old autistic man, I am in a much better situation now than I used to be as I've started this journey. But I still have meltdowns and I still have bad days. But the more you reflect and learn, the easier it gets over time. So it is crucial that you start as soon as possible. And to reduce, I mentioned this already a bit earlier, but to reduce struggles as much as possible, the best approach is to learn about autism together and problem solve together when you are facing difficulties. So what can you do? The first thing is doing something which is called cognitive reappraisal. So as a bit of context, autistic people as a whole tend to have a sort of reactionary view on things. So if you have a negative situation with a person or in a setting, you can automatically link that person or setting with that negative emotion, and it doesn't really change from that often. But what's more effective than this is cognitive reappraisal, which is where you take time to think about the day, reflect on it, and this can sort of give you more insight that you may not have if you just stick with your emotions and cause and effect type feelings. This is a skill that a lot of autistic people struggle with, and a lot of people innately don't practice cognitive reappraisal, but it is a skill that you can learn, and once you do this, it can it's another one of those things that I say is essential for an autistic person. A simple way to start is, at the end of the day, writing down 3 things that have gone well and 3 things that haven't gone well. If there are 3 things that have been good, you can think about what you can do to make sure they continue to happen. If there are things that haven't gone well, think about what you can do differently to stop those things from happening or the learning from it. Every time you do this, you are making steps and action points to make your life better and better every single time, while also getting into the process of learning to reflect and think about what you can do differently and what other people can do differently as well. And once you've got enough practice, you can do it on the go without needing to write things down. But as I said, you need to be able to practice to get to that point. The other thing, as I said, is make sure you continue to have an open dialogue about autism and differences. It is so important to make sure young people learn to accept their differences. I want young people to say, I'm stuck with autism, whether I like it or not. Whether it's good or bad, whether I love it or hate it, I'm stuck with it, so I may as well try to enjoy it. When you're in that mindset, rather than hating autism or being ashamed of it, you are in the best position to live the happiest life you can. The other thing you can do as a professional or parent or anyone else is show that you are human too. As a young person, it feels like everyone's got their life together and everything's perfect for every other human being. And just being open and being open about making mistakes, apologise if you do something wrong, doing this sort of thing can be really, really powerful for a young person. You can also, rather than giving young people tips on what they can do better, ask what you can do better as well, and sort of adjust the balance of it, and that can help with increasing, creating mutual trust and respect, which are just absolutely crucial. For me, trust and respect are the most important things. If I don't get on well with someone, I don't feel like, if I don't respect them, even if it's my boss at work or a friend's parent or something like that, if I don't feel respected by them, then they don't get respect back, and no matter how hard I try, I find it incredibly difficult to sort of be around them or do what they say, or I don't know, I don't know. I think integrity, honesty, trust, and that sort of thing is really, really important. But when I think about supporting young people, people say the most important thing is not meeting all of their needs and getting everything right. They always say it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be confident and get things wrong, as long as you try your best. As I said, they are learning just as you are, and just having those vulnerable conversations and discussions and working together is more important than absolutely anything else you could ever do. And I have a perfect example of this with a story from a young person's parent after getting his permission. So this is Fred's story. I'll just read it out to you. Due to our son's autism, sensitive school environment, bullying, and lack of understanding from staff, our son was constantly in fight or flight mode. Everything became an issue, and his level of coping skills reduced. He was tipped over the edge for the smallest of issues, and staff not following advice from his passport. Situations escalated, and he became angry all the time. It was a terrible, dark time for our son and for us as a family. He was referred to his CAMS numerous times due to self-harm and suicidal ideation. We felt that as a family we were at breaking point, as we were worried about his emotional health. He was so angry and anxious all the time, which caused his behaviour to become very challenging at home as well. Fast forward a little, and our son is in a new school where he is thriving. He now has lots of friends and he's a popular member of a class. Our son is getting his confidence and self-esteem back. He attends clubs and after-school activities on a regular basis. He is happy in himself, and although he is now a teenager, we don't have any of the challenging behaviour as previously experienced when he was on high alert/anxiety mode. He happily goes to school and comes home relaxed. No concerns regarding his mental health, and he no longer has thoughts of self-harm. However, he is scarred from his previous experience of school. For this I can't forgive, but have to let it go for the sake of my own mental health. We still have bumps along the way, but the difference is that staff listen and have an understanding of his challenges and needs. I am so grateful to his new school because I have my boy back. And I think this is incredibly powerful, because notice how they haven't talked about having extra provision or extra support in place. For them, the most important thing is that staff listen and try and have an understanding of his challenges and his needs. That doesn't cost any money, but it is so important, and it has completely changed this young person's life. So with that extra understanding and motivation, just simply trying your best to support that young person, it can completely change a young person's life for the better. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found today useful. Thank you.